They said his face was unmistakable, that jutting Habsburg jaw carved into every royal portrait. But when Charles II of Spain died and the surgeons finally opened his body, what they found was worse than any portrait ever hinted at. The heart was small and hard, almost stone. The lungs were collapsing. The kidneys were black, riddled with cysts, and the skull was full of water. This wasn't just an autopsy. It was a post-mortem on a dynasty, a body revealing how a bloodline had been quietly killing itself from within. Spain looked powerful on maps and hollow everywhere else. Wars drained the treasury. Silver arrived in smaller shipments. Famine carved through Castile. Rebellions smoldered at the edges of the empire, and rivals whispered that Spain was a giant made of paper. And in every ambassador's letter, one fear circled the page. The kingdom's greatest weakness was the failing body of its king. Charles drifted in and out of lucidity, forgot decisions, and seemed to age in sudden, jarring drops. Counselors would brief him on matters of state, only to repeat the same words an hour later to a man who no longer remembered they had spoken. When the surgeons opened him, they realized the collapse had begun decades earlier. Long before the autopsy, the dynasty had already started to fold in on itself. For generations, the Habsburgs married cousins, nieces, uncles, drawing their family tree, not as branches, but as circles. On parchment, it looked impressive, a web of alliances wrapped around Europe. But if you traced the line slowly, you saw something else, the same names, looping back, again and again, like a noose, tightening in slow motion. Every marriage was meant to protect the bloodline. Instead, it trapped it, locking the same flawed genes inside a shrinking royal cage. By the time Charles was born, the dynasty didn't need an assassin. It carried its own execution in the marrow of its bones. The Habsburg jaw wasn't just a family trait, it was a warning written across a dynasty's face. In Charles II, it was stark, an elongated lower jaw, teeth that never met, a mouth that couldn't fully close. Speaking was labor. Chewing was work. On canvases, court painters tried to soften it, tilting his head, shadowing the jawline, but the deformity bled through the varnish all the same. His inbreeding coefficient, 0.25, meant he shared as much genetic material with his parents as most people share with a sibling. From birth, his body was a compromise. He learned to swallow slowly, to avoid choking on food his own mouth wasn't built to handle. The jaw was the omen. The deeper damage waited inside. The kidneys were black, small, full of cysts, a body slowly poisoning itself. His abdomen swelled. Courtiers whispered he looked pregnant with death. Food stalled, fluids pooled, toxins lingered. His legs grew heavy, and his steps shortened. He became tired climbing even the simplest stairs. While inside him, wastes collected and thickened. Spain felt the same, bloated and stagnant, unable to clear its own decay. Edicts piled up in council chambers and petitions stacked on desks. Nothing moved through the system without rotting on the way. The king's organs were failing, and so were the empire's. The heart was small and hard, rigid, underdeveloped. It was a pump barely capable of sustaining a man. In a healthier king, a heartbeat could have driven armies, held together a court of rivals, steadied a nation. In Charles, each beat was the effort of a tired muscle that had never truly grown. Spain's treasury mirrored it, shrunken and stained, unable to circulate resources through the empire it once fueled. Bills went unpaid, soldiers went hungry, fortresses waited for money that never arrived. This is the point where the story stops being about one broken king and becomes a warning about what happens when any dynasty keeps power too tightly bound to its own blood. Because when a system refuses fresh life, whether it's a family, a court, or a state, it doesn't just weaken, it starts to consume itself. The skull was full of water, a drowning of the brain from within. His thoughts were slowed, memory blurred, and judgment warped. On some days, he seemed almost present, asking questions, listening, and trying to understand the reports laid before him. On others, he stared past his ministers as if the room were underwater and their voices could no longer reach. A king whose mind was waterlogged became easy to steer, a marionette pulled by ambassadors, priests, ministers, each tugging a different string. In the skull of a single man, a whole continent jockeyed for leverage, and yet, for all the influence they fought over, there was one thing no one could extract from him. One testicle was recorded as black as coal. It was a dead organ, a sign of endocrine collapse, and near certain infertility. For most men, it was a tragedy. For a king, it was the future of the dynasty turning to ash. He married, then married again. Courts waited for news of a child, any sign the line will continue. Instead, they watched the seasons turn over empty nurseries and unused cradles. Charles II died with no heir, armies mobilized before his body cooled. Diplomats called him the ticking hourglass of Europe. Every signature he placed on paper, every rumor of illness, tilted the balance of power across the continent. And when the last grain fell, war began. A conflict not over land, but over the remains of a bloodline that had finally run out of itself. On his final day, Charles barely resembled the living. His skin was gray, abdomen swollen, breath wet and ragged. Servants swore the candles dipped each time he exhaled. Priests moved in and out of his chamber murmuring prayers, pressing relics to skin already cooling at the edges. Ministers stood in the corridor waiting for one final coherent order, just one sentence that might steady the succession, but none came. In the palace, whispers changed tense from "the king is ill" to "the king was." Their monarch and their empire were dying the same death, slow, swollen, and inevitable. When he exhaled for the final time, messengers were already mounted. Europe had been waiting. Seals were broken. Secret wills unfolded. Maps were redrawn before his body cooled. When historians read the autopsy today, they don't just see a king. They see an equation, a dynasty choosing purity of blood over survival. Generation after generation, they tightened the circle until one man's body carried every flaw they had been too proud to dilute. The jaw was the omen, the autopsy was the verdict. A body collapsing in perfect synchrony with the empire it ruled. Some empires rise by blood, and many fall because of it. And when you look at the families who still clutch power today, in palaces, in boardrooms, in parliaments, you have to wonder. How many of them are already writing their own autopsy without realizing it?